If tales of quiet resilience and reclaimed legacies stir your soul, smash that subscribe button today. Unlock more heart-stirring stories that prove it's never too late to rewrite your chapter. The evening had barely settled when the first sting cut through me. Families are supposed to gather around birthdays with warmth, with laughter, with cake glowing under candles. But instead, my 65th began with a smile that carried poison and a son who could not meet my eyes. That night, I walked into a restaurant where I had once celebrated anniversaries and milestones, only to be told by my daughter-in-law that this would be my last meal of freedom before the nursing home. The words slipped out of her mouth like venom, and the silence from my son was louder than the insult itself. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I simply raised my glass, sipped, and answered that it would be their last meal while having a house to live in. When I left the table that night, I knew my life had reached a breaking point. For too long, I had hidden behind silence, giving everything and demanding nothing. And now my generosity had been twisted into weakness. At home, I unclasped William's old watch from my wrist and felt the weight of his absence press against my skin. 15 years had passed since his sudden heart attack. 15 years of raising Michael, paying his bills, shielding him from failures, even rescuing him during the housing crash of 2008 when I drained savings William and I had built to stop the bank from taking his home. I told myself mothers were meant to shield, meant to erase ledgers before they became shame. But as Michael drifted into Emily's orbit of handbags and renovations, gratitude disappeared. My sacrifices were no longer seen as love. They were expected as debt. That night, unable to sleep, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the thick envelope I had hidden for years. Inside was the deed to the house Michael and Emily claimed as theirs, a deed I had transferred into my own name to shield the property from creditors during the crash. At the time, I believed it was temporary, a measure of protection until they recovered. But they never thanked me, never asked to see it, and I had let the years roll by in silence. Now, after Emily's public humiliation, that silence felt like betrayal of myself. I picked up the phone and called David Jenkins, William's old friend and my attorney. Calm, discreet, steady. David had always been a man who understood loyalty. I told him we needed to review the deed. By morning, he sat at my kitchen table with coffee and quiet reassurance. He read the papers and confirmed what I already knew. The house was legally mine if they pressed me, if they threatened me further. I had every right to begin eviction proceedings for the first time in years. I felt clarity settle in. Fear no longer lived in my chest. The battle was only beginning, but for once it would not be fought on their terms. Within days, the whispers began. Cousins and nieces calling with strained concern, repeating words that sounded rehearsed. They had heard I was forgetting things, that maybe it was time to get help. It was Emily's hand at work, planting seeds of decline in every ear that would listen. When a geriatric specialist appeared at my door one afternoon, clipboard in hand, claiming my family had requested an evaluation, I nearly laughed. I stood firm and refused her entry. She left with polite words but pitying eyes. And as I closed the door, I saw Michael's car idling across the street. He tried to suggest that maybe I should be checked. Maybe it wouldn't hurt. I looked at him, at the boy I had once held through storms, and asked what exactly I was forgetting. His silence said enough. I scheduled my own medical evaluation that night. Blood work, cognitive tests, every proof I could gather. If Emily wanted to build a narrative, I would answer it with facts. Yet the deeper betrayal came not from her words, but from what I discovered days later. In my jewelry box, heirlooms were missing. My mother's pearls, my aunt's emerald earrings, William's bracelet gone. David sent a private investigator named Sarah Klein, who traced them to a pawn shop near Old Town. The records were clear. They had been sold 2 months earlier. The photographs told the rest. My son, Michael, standing beside Emily, her hand on his arm as he signed the papers. The pearls that had once glowed with my mother's memory dangled cheap in the shopkeeper's hand. The ache of that discovery nearly crushed me. It was not only Emily's scheming. It was Michael's hand guiding the pen. His silence now carved into betrayal. David reminded me this was evidence, powerful and undeniable. I slid the folder closed, steadied myself, and told him to prepare for what came next. I was finished living as though I had nothing to protect. The pounding on my front door came before dawn, shaking the silence of the house like a storm. Emily stood there when I cracked it open, her hair tangled, her eyes blazing with fury. Her voice rang down the street as she shouted that I thought a piece of paper made me queen, that I was nothing more than a bitter old woman trying to steal what she and Michael had built. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, their curiosity mixing with pity. I did not argue. I did not match her volume. I simply closed the door, locked it, and called the police. When Officer Harris arrived, his calm presence steadied me. By then, David was already on his way, a folder of documents tucked under his arm as Emily raged in the driveway. I handed the officer the deed, the pawn slips, and the bank records David had compiled. I told him plainly the jewelry had been stolen. The house had been transferred years ago, and every cent that had gone into it had come from me. Harris listened, flipping through notarized seals and signatures, his face hardening. He turned to Emily and told her she had no legal standing here, that she needed to leave immediately. Her face drained of color, anger collapsing into disbelief. She turned to Michael, who hovered near the yard's edge. His shoulders slumped. He would not look at me. I said his name softly, but he stared at the gravel as if it might swallow him whole. Emily hissed her final threat. "You'll regret this," before dragging him toward the car. He did not resist. David's voice was firm when he turned back to me. "It is time," he said. "File the charges." My answer came steady with no hesitation. Eviction, theft, enough was enough. 2 days later, Detective Brooks called with news that landed like stone. Michael had been taken into custody at the downtown bank where he worked. By the next afternoon, I stood inside the visiting room of the county jail, the fluorescent lights harsh, the air thick with disinfectant. When Michael walked in wearing the beige uniform, my heart twisted. For a moment, I saw the boy who once clung to my hand on his first day of school. But then his eyes fell, and the distance between us felt greater than any wall. His voice was rough when he spoke. He confessed not with excuses, but with a trembling honesty. Emily had been gambling for years, online casinos, sports betting, anything she could reach. Each time she promised it was the last, and each time Michael had covered the losses. He admitted pawning the jewelry, taking the money, hiding her debts. He told himself it was survival, that he was protecting her, protecting their family. His words stumbled, his hands rubbing together, wrists still raw from cuffs. He said he thought he could pay it all back before I ever knew. My anger was cold, not shouting but sharp. Protecting her, I told him, was not protecting anyone. It was destroying me. It was erasing the memory of a father who had once built everything with me. He wept quietly, asking me not to press further, but I shook my head. Love, I told him, does not erase consequences. I can love you, Michael, and still hold you accountable. His silence was heavy, his head bowed as the guard came to take him away. I placed my hand on the glass. "Find the man you lost," I whispered. "But I will not save you this time." Months moved slowly after that, filled with hearings, papers, and signatures that finally secured my home and assets. At first, the silence inside the house felt hollow, but gradually it became companionable. I filled it with new rhythms, morning walks beneath cottonwoods, afternoons painting rough landscapes at the community center, evenings with a small book club at the library where laughter was light and unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt my life belonged to me again. With David's guidance, I rewrote my will. The properties and investments William and I had built would not be left to fuel greed. Instead, they would form a foundation to help older women like me, women cornered by family and left voiceless. For Michael, I left only a modest sum, enough for him to start again if he chose. When I signed the last page, David looked at me and said I had not just secured my assets, but my dignity. For once, I believed him. Then one Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived from the county jail. 5 pages written in Michael's careful script. His words admitted everything: pawned jewelry, siphoned money, silence in the face of Emily's threats. He wrote of her cruelty, of his weakness, of how fear drove him to betray me. He ended not with a plea for forgiveness, but with a request that I remember the boy he once was, the boy who loved me. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk beside William's watch. I did not answer, but I could not throw it away either. Spring arrived with soft mornings and the scent of new blossoms drifting through my windows. I had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the steady rhythm of days no longer spent anticipating conflict. Yet one morning, as I pressed marigold seedlings into the soil of my garden, a voice called from the gate that made me pause. "Mrs. Thompson," it said, soft but clear. I I looked up to see a young man, no older than 20, his dark hair catching the sunlight in a way that startled me. His eyes stopped my breath. They were William's eyes. He shifted nervously, introducing himself as Ethan Thompson, my grandson, Michael's son from before Emily. He explained that he had only found Michael a few months earlier and that he had heard about me. His words were respectful, his posture steady, nothing like the defensive sharpness I had grown used to from Michael and Emily. He held out a folder of paper school records, pieces of his life, and asked nothing of me, only the chance to know where he came from. The word grandmother landed heavier than any deed or jewel I had ever held. Cautiously, I welcomed him inside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where months earlier David and I had spread deeds and evidence. Now it held nothing more than 2 glasses of water and the weight of possibility. Ethan told me about his mother, about growing up without Michael, about working his way through school. He spoke plainly without expectation, and I listened for the first time in years. Family felt like something chosen rather than demanded. After he left that afternoon, I stood by the gate, watching him disappear down the street. The house behind me was secure, the will rewritten, the battles settled. But here was something I had not anticipated, an inheritance of a different kind, a chance to plant new roots in soil that had once been broken. I felt a quiet strength settle in me, one that did not come from legal victories or financial safeguards, but from the simple possibility of connection. The months that followed were gentler. Ethan began visiting occasionally, sometimes helping me in the garden, sometimes simply sharing stories over dinner. He never asked about the money or the house. He only asked about William, about childhood memories of Michael before Emily, about the kind of family history that cannot be measured in dollars or deeds. Each time he left, I felt something mend, small but undeniable. Through it all, the lessons of the past remained sharp. I had spent years giving without demanding respect, mistaking silence for love. In doing so, I had allowed my sacrifices to become invisible. It had taken betrayal and loss to teach me that love must walk hand in hand with boundaries. That dignity cannot be surrendered without cost. When I signed the foundation papers that would direct my estate to women like me, I felt the weight of that truth. In the evenings, as the desert sky blazed pink and orange over the Sandia Mountains, I often sat with Linda, the caregiver who had become a friend, and shared laughter untainted by fear. Sometimes when the night grew quiet, I would reread Michael's letter. The words still hurt, but they also reminded me of the boy who had once pressed his head to my shoulder when thunder frightened him. I chose not to answer. Not yet. But I also chose not to forget. Some wounds do not vanish, but they do not erase the whole of a life either. I began to believe what Susan from the book club had told me one evening. It is never too late to start again. Whether with paint on a canvas, laughter around a table, or the unexpected arrival of a grandson at my gate, life still carried moments worth claiming. The future was no longer about what Michael or Emily might take from me, but about what I could give intentionally, wisely, and with dignity intact. If you've been following Alina's journey, let this be your reminder. Boundaries are not walls. They are safeguards for love and respect. Sometimes the bravest act is not holding on, but letting go and choosing to live differently. If this story moved you, please like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your reflections.